The Cellar. Katherine Marie Knight was born on October 24, 1955, in Tenterfield, New South Wales, Australia. Growing up, Katherine was said to have been raised in an extremely dysfunctional environment. Her mother, Barbara Rowan, was married to Jack Rowan. While married to Jack, the pair would conceive 4 children, all of them boys. After having 4 children together, Barbara would begin an adulterous relationship with a co-worker of her husband's named Ken Knight. When word ultimately got out about their unsavory relationship, the pair were forced to move to Moree. Moree is a town in Moree Plains Shire in northern New South Wales, Australia. It is located on the banks of the Mehi River. As far as the 4 children, the 2 oldest boys would continue to live with their father, while the younger boys would move in with their aunt, who would raise them in Sydney, Australia. Barbara would then go on to have 4 more children with Ken Knight. 2 of these kids would end up being twin girls who were born in 1955 in Tenterfield. Katherine Knight was one of these twin daughters. To add to the ultimate chaos that was this family, in 1959, Jack Rowan passed away. Following his untimely death, the 2 older sons that had been living with him would soon be forced to move in with Barbara and Ken, causing more chaos amongst the family, with Katherine only being 4 years old at the time. Taking a deeper dive into the family, I found that Ken Knight was an extremely violent alcoholic. It was said that he would force himself on Barbara upwards of 10 times a day. This pushed Barbara, causing her mental state to become more and more less stable. In fact, she often talked to her daughters about intimate details of her life, disclosing how much hatred she bore towards men. As Katherine got older, she would soon begin dating like any girl would at that time in her young, budding life. At one point, Katherine had a boyfriend that wanted her to take part in sexual acts that she was uncomfortable with. When Katherine went to her mother for advice, her mother simply stated that she needed to stop complaining and just put up with it. It's easy to say that Katherine's entire mindset and outlook on men and relationships was badly formed. Her mother and the relationships she took part in did nothing but scar Katherine for the rest of her life. To further add to Katherine's horrible upbringing, it was reported that she had been SA'd by several members of her family. This reportedly took place when she was young and carried on until she was 11 years old, a dark chapter in the life of Katherine Knight. As a teenager, Katherine would attend Muswellbrook High School. Muswellbrook is a town in the Upper Hunter region of New South Wales, Australia. It's located around 243 kilometers or 150 miles north of Sydney and 127 kilometers or 78.9 miles northwest of Newcastle. In high school, Katherine was a loner who had little to no friends. It's said that she would lash out and was something of a bully who would pick on kids that were smaller than her. It's said that Katherine had 2 sides to her. One side was a model student who got good grades and earned awards for her positive behavior, but there was a darker side to Katherine. That other side of her saw her attack a boy at school with a weapon, and she once injured a teacher. With her behavior being all over the place, Katherine would eventually drop out of school at only 15 years old. Having little skills, she sought out employment and would obtain a job as a cutter within a clothing factory. This job would only last around 12 months, as Katherine would leave to pursue what she called her dream job. That dream job was cutting up offal at the local abattoir. For those that don't know what that means, well, an abattoir is otherwise known as a slaughterhouse, while offal is the name for internal organs of a butchered animal. Katherine would excel in this line of work, quickly being promoted to cutting and boning, which involves breaking an animal carcass into parts and then removing the flesh from the bones. With this promotion, Katherine was given her own set of butcher knives, which she is said to have been extremely proud to have earned. Katherine would even hang her new knives over her bed at home, stating that she liked to have them handy in case she ever needed them. This habit of hanging her knives over her bed will continue throughout the rest of her free life. Now that we know who Katherine is and how she was shaped by her upbringing, we will now jump forward to 1973, the year that Katherine first met co-worker David Stanford Kellett. Kellett, like her father before, was an extremely heavy drinker. It's said that David's drinking came from traumatic experiences within his life. One experience was his best friend, who had his life ended in front of him, and another was a school bus accident that involved the bus being struck by a train. It's said that David rescued occupants from the school bus, but in doing so, he endured trauma from seeing 6 children who had not survived the tragic event. David's drinking would eventually cost him his job working for the railway, and that's what ultimately led him to working at the slaughterhouse, where he would meet Katherine. The budding romance would quickly evolve into a marriage as the couple would get hitched a year later in 1974. But it wasn't all butterflies and rainbows, as Katherine would try and kill her new husband on their wedding night. The reason for this behavior? Well, according to Katherine, she was upset that her new husband had fallen asleep after only getting intimate with her 3 times that evening. It was clear, right from the get-go, that Katherine and David were volatile, like gas to an open flame. But the couple would continue moving forward, and soon Katherine would get pregnant. During her pregnancy, Katherine got extremely angry with David one night. He had arrived home late from a darts competition, and Katherine would proceed to light David's clothes and shoes on fire. In her fit of rage, Katherine would soon grab a frying pan, and she proceeded to crack David across the back of his head. Fearing for his life, David would run and eventually fall down in their neighbor's front lawn. An ambulance and police were called, and it was found that David's skull had been fractured. Police at the time wanted David to press charges, but he would eventually have a change of heart and ultimately chose to drop all charges against his wife. Katherine Knight would give birth to the couple's first child, Melissa Ann, in May of 1976. Following the birth of their child, David would abandon Katherine for another woman. He simply couldn't handle the daily abuse any longer, and he up and moved to Queensland with his new romantic fling. Following this betrayal, Katherine was spotted pushing her brand new baby girl down Main Street in town. Onlookers were in shock to see her violently throwing the stroller around from side to side. This ultimately led to Katherine being admitted to the St. Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth. Soon after her admittance, the doctors at the hospital would diagnose Katherine with postnatal depression. She would spend numerous weeks in the hospital, working with doctors until they felt like she was in a better place to be released back to the public. Little did they know at the time, Katherine's reckless and destructive behavior was about to get far worse, as shortly after she was released, she would take her 2-month-old daughter Melissa to the nearby train tracks. She then placed the child on the tracks and went back into town, where she threatened the lives of numerous people that came into contact with her. Luckily for Melissa, a man named Old Ted was foraging near the train tracks around the same time Katherine had placed her there. He would discover the child and rescued her from the tracks only mere moments before a train would come through the area. This once again led to Katherine being readmitted to the hospital, but this stay would be even shorter-lived as she would check herself out only 1 day later. Following this second, but brief hospital stint, Katherine would continue her aggressive path of destruction. Katherine would come into contact with a woman whom she slashed with one of her work knives while demanding that the innocent woman drive her to Queensland to find her husband David Kellett. The woman would give in to her demands and managed to escape Katherine when they had to make a stop at a gas station. The police would soon be called to the scene, but by the time they arrived, Katherine had taken a young boy hostage. Eventually, Katherine was disarmed and the young boy was rescued. This time, Katherine was admitted to the Morisset Psychiatric Hospital. At the hospital, Katherine soon admitted to the doctors that she wanted to take the life of the mechanic at the gas station because he had supposedly repaired David's car, which resulted in David being able to leave her. David at the time had no idea any of this was happening until the police managed to get in touch with him. Once he found out, he quickly left his new girlfriend and moved to Aberdeen with his mother. He ultimately wanted to try and support his wife during everything she was going through. On August 9, 1976, Katherine Knight was released to the care of her mother-in-law and husband. Together they moved to Ipswich, a city west of Brisbane. Katherine would soon obtain a job at the Dunmore Meatworks. For the next 4 years or so, Katherine's life seemingly was quiet in comparison to everything that had unfolded in 1976. In March of 1980, the couple had a second daughter, Natasha Marie. But not all was well in the household, as this time Katherine left David, eventually moving into a rental house in nearby Muswellbrook. She would return to work at the slaughterhouse for the next year, but at some point she injured her back badly and ended up having to go on a disability pension. With Katherine no longer working, she took advantage of the government's housing commission and ended up finding a residence in Aberdeen. Over the next 20 years, Katherine would bounce around between numerous volatile relationships. I'm not going to dive into each and every one of them, but let's just say they were all extremely violent in nature. At this time, we're going to jump ahead into right around the early 90s. John Charles Thomas Price was a father of 3 children. From all reports, he was a good man that was loved by many, and at the time, he and his current wife were on rocky terms. John would soon meet Katherine Knight, and the pair began having an affair, which ultimately led to his marriage ending. In 1995, Katherine Knight would move into John's home with him and his 2 oldest children. From all reports, their relationship was good early on. John was making good money working within the local mines, and Katherine's violent tendencies had not yet escalated beyond normal everyday arguments. That was until 1998. Katherine Knight at the time had been pushing John to marry her, and he had refused. This would send Katherine into a rage, which led to her videotaping items that John had taken from his work. Most of the items were stuff John had scavenged from his workplace's rubbish pit. But even so, Katherine sent this videotape to John's employer, and John was subsequently fired from the job he had held for 17 years. John angrily threw Katherine out of his home that very same day. But within a few months' time, the couple would rekindle their relationship, although this time, John refused to let Katherine move back into his house. This caused a lot of strife within the relationship, as the pair would have more and more verbal altercations. Jumping ahead now to February of 2000, Katherine would attack John numerous times, ultimately stabbing him in the chest. For John, this was the last straw, as he informed Katherine that their relationship was over. John would end up stopping at the magistrate's court, where he filed a restraining order against Katherine. His hope was to keep her as far away from himself and his children. On the afternoon of February 28, 2000, John Price was at work when he informed his co-workers that if he did not come to work the next day, that it would be as a result of Katherine Knight taking his life. When John Price arrived home from work that evening, he found out that his children had been sent away for a sleepover at a friend's house. According to reports, Katherine had arranged the sleepover. This left John feeling uneasy, so he ended up going over to his neighbor's house for the evening. He would eventually head back to his home at around 11 p.m. that evening to go to bed. Later that night, Katherine would end up slipping into John's house. She first sat and watched TV while John slept. Following a brief moment, she hopped into the shower before slipping into bed with John. The pair would be intimate before John passed back out. The following morning, John Price did not show up for work. Concerned, his employer sent a worker over to his house to see what was wrong. They made numerous efforts to wake John, knocking on his front door and bedroom window. But soon, the employee made a startling discovery: blood on the front door. The police would soon be called to the scene, and when they arrived, they found Katherine Knight passed out from seemingly taking a large number of pills. The police would soon find John, or at the very least, what was left of him, all over the house. I now want to warn you all that viewer discretion is advised, as what unfolded is horrific to say the least. From all reports, while John Price slept, Katherine Knight took her precious butcher knife to him. John would wake up, and he made all efforts to escape, but Katherine would chase him through the household. John managed to get just outside his front door, but he soon collapsed from a massive loss of blood. It was later revealed that Katherine had struck Price 37 times. Several hours later, Katherine then decided to put her butchering skills to use, as she skinned John before eventually removing his head. Now, I won't get too descriptive with the details, but ultimately, Katherine would make a meal out of John's body, with all intentions of feeding him to his children. She had the dinner table all set up, with baked potatoes, carrots, zucchini, cabbage, and squash all set to go with the meal. The police would end up discovering John's head in a pot of vegetables later on. Needless to say, the crime scene was something straight out of a horror movie, and if you're looking for further details on what unfolded, a quick Google search will lead you to plenty of results. Ultimately, Katherine would survive her attempt at her own life. She would be arrested and ultimately taken to trial. In the midst of the trial, Katherine would make the decision to change her plea to guilty, and on November 8, 2001, she was sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole. In fact, her papers from the trial would be marked, definitely never to be released. This made Katherine Knight the first woman in Australian history to ever be given life in prison without parole, an indictment that I am sure everyone can agree is at the very least what she deserved. Although you could argue that no punishment could ever be severe enough after what Katherine Knight did to John Price. Tragically, Katherine Knight's story is a perfect example of becoming a product of one's surroundings. I ultimately want to send my condolences to John Price's family, his children, and friends, as no one, and I mean no one, deserves to suffer an end like he endured. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. Also, you can check the description box below to find the link to my merch store. Tons of awesome designs, and the proceeds help fund the channel. For those of you that are interested, I have a Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. It's $2.99 a month, comes with some pretty cool perks, so if that interests you, then please go check that out. I also have that linked in the description box below. If you'd like to submit a real-life scary story that you'd like featured on an episode on the channel, please do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.